we are not professing to tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know.
Right.
But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
I look at mind control as kind of a more general, informal level of mind control, and then what I call psychiatric mind control. So psychiatric mind control is there's actually a psychiatrist or a doctor right there interacting one-on-one with the person who's the target of the subject. The more kind of general global mind control just works by control of the media, control of information, disinformation, propaganda, and I think our culture basically is run like that. It's very pervasive. The basic gist of behaviorism is Pavlov's dog experiment, where you have the dog that eats its meal and it salivates when you put the meat out. Then when you ring a bell at the same time, the bell gets paired with the salivation. And then what you find, if you condition it enough times, you can just ring the bell and the dog will start to salivate. So that's classical conditioning. There's Skinner and Watson, both experiment on children. Skinner actually on his own daughter had her in a Skinner box for a good chunk of the first 2 years of her life, which was a very enclosed environment. It was actually physically a box. The temperature was controlled. And he thought that was a good way to bring up children and get them to perform exactly the way they should. So it's basically just repeating something and getting it ingrained in the person's psyche. And that basic principle is used in mind control, used in advertising, used all over the place all the time. When you look at the techniques that are used in mind control, a lot of them are pretty low tech, like sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, food deprivation, kind of good cop, bad cop interrogation techniques. We know that hypnosis more or less was used in Greek healing centers, BC. So all these techniques have been around, and I assume that what we have now is the same sort of palette of techniques with a lot of technology and sophistication added on top. Mind control's probably been around for tens or hundreds of thousands of years. It probably was well developed in ancient China. In terms of actual documented mind control, it really begins in the Second World War. During the Second World War, there was no, in the United States, there was no central coordinating intelligence agency. There's all this fragmented, different branches of the military, and the decision was made to create a central intelligence agency called the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which operated till the end of the war. And then there was kind of a 2-year lull period, and then in 1947, the CIA was formed, mostly from prior OSS guys.
The buildings behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Services. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began. The shaper and molder of OSS was General Wild Bill Donovan. In this anything-goes atmosphere, Donovan appointed this man, Stanley Lovell, a Boston industrialist, to break new ground in many scientific and technical fields. He later wrote of his OSS job that it was, quote, to stimulate the PEC's bad boy beneath the surface of every American scientist and to say to him, throw all of your normal law-abiding concepts out of the window. Here's a chance to raise merry hell. It was in this atmosphere that the search for mind control began. It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, with the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
My germination took place on the...
that would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing.
In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand on them. And by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, were you a spy? He says, yes, I was a spy. The Chinese never really had this kind of a state police system. They would get him in, and all this fellow does is ask you to write, rewrite, and talk to him about your whole life.
Graduated from pilot training in 1949.
While the purpose of the study was to find out about communist brainwashing techniques, CIA documents show that the agency was interested in developing mind control methods of its own to precondition and control Chinese living in this country to be sent back to their homeland as CIA agents.
The documentation on G.H. Estabrooks, who was a contractor during the Second World War, proves that active mind control experimentation was already going on in the 1941 to 1945 time frame. The Office of Strategic Services, which is the precursor of the CIA, was studying different types of drugs, interrogation techniques, and G.H. Estabrooks was creating super spies, Manchurian candidates, using hypnosis and other techniques that were used operationally during the war. And the OSS then was shut down at the end of the war, and most of the personnel then became the new CIA in 1947. And the CIA's programs begin in 1950 and run forward to 1973. And then after 1973, everything is classified.
The man who would oversee the CIA's research into drugs and most of the agency's behavior programs is this man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist. He retired in 1973 and destroyed the records of this work. In sort of a valedictory letter, Dr. Gottlieb wrote that he and his colleagues had been able to maintain contact with the leading edge of developments in the field of biological and chemical control of human behavior. Dr. Gottlieb also testified before the Senate subcommittee, but from an anteroom where he could not be filmed.
Qualifications would be the subject selected to produce the kind of behavior that you wish, the amount of time, the procedures that are utilized, and the motivations of the people who are designing, executing, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes.
This term Jekyll-Hyde personality is used repeatedly by G.H. Estabrooks. He, at various times, did seminars on military uses of hypnosis and creating the super spy on a variety of different military bases. In 1943, in his textbook Hypnotism, and as late as 1971 in an article in a magazine called Science Digest, he describes creating Manchurian candidates, which is artificial multiple personality, just like the Bourne identity, during the Second World War for operational use on contract to the Army. He would create, there's Jones A as the original guy, then he would create Jones B, which he called a Jekyll-Hyde personality. So he used this phrase Jekyll-Hyde personality quite a lot. And an example of an operation would be Jones is called in to see this colonel, and the colonel has been told what the hypnotically implanted code word is. It's "the moon is clear." So this guy comes in, he thinks that he's being sent to Tokyo on a routine, unclassified courier assignment. He's given the assignment, and then the military guy in Washington goes, "The moon is clear." Jones B comes out, the military guy in Washington gives him the classified information, flips him back to his regular self. He flies over to Tokyo. The colonel at the far end says, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you, thank you." That's the above board assignment. The guy at the far end says, "The moon is clear." Out comes Jones B, gives him the information, the response is inserted, back he goes. And he describes these guys having complete amnesia for the operation and being used operationally in a variety of settings during the Second World War. The typical way that you hypnotize somebody is you either, you don't actually usually use the swinging wristwatch anymore, but you use a kind of relaxation, close your eyes, feet are getting warm, all the way up your legs, hands, whole body's getting warm and relaxed, you're going into a deep, deep sleep. And you're basically getting the person to narrow their attention and focus on you and heighten their suggestibility so that they'll comply with the things you're doing. And you can use hypnosis in a kind of direct, obvious way, where, hello, I'm going to hypnotize you, here's what I'm going to do. Or you can also do it in a kind of indirect, more tricky way the person barely notices. The whole purpose is to focus awareness, put distractions out of your mind, and be more open to suggestions. These mind control programs for creating Manchurian candidates don't just use hypnosis or just LSD or just interrogation techniques. It's a whole lot of different techniques brought to bear for long periods of time. There are experiments in the literature showing, including the CIA documents, showing that you can condition somebody hypnotically and get them to fire a pistol at somebody, believing that the pistol is loaded, and then have no memory for having done that. I don't think it's really about getting people to do what they wouldn't ordinarily do as a spy or as a soldier. It's more about if they're captured and interrogated, it's all hidden behind an amnesia barrier. It's about protecting the assignment. There's specific experiments going back to the Second World War and in the CIA documents in the 50s and 60s to create amnesia. That is, somebody will go in, take papers off of somebody, go and steal documents, deliver a message, drop off a briefcase. There's a whole bunch of different tasks under hypnotic control and then have no memory afterwards. The Manchurian Candidate, which is the artificial multiple personality, is kind of like the super version of that, where it's not just simple amnesia, there's an actual new person in behind the barrier who carries out the assignment, remembers it, follows all the orders.
So one of the disinformation denial stories that we hear all the time is, we only got into this defensively in reaction to what the communist Chinese were doing during the Korean War. We had our pilots who were captured, they were subjected to some sort of interrogation, brainwashing techniques. They came back home and they made false confessions of germ warfare.
He discussed 3 different ways to employ germ warfare. Firstly, by dropping germs by themselves, or secondly, by dropping germs with insects, thirdly, by dropping animals to carry the germs and the insects.
The only other instruction I received, of course, was the order to carry out my germ warfare mission. I know I was wondering myself why on earth we were using this terrible weapon in Korea, even while the peace talks were going on in Kaesong. When my son asked me what I did in Korea, how can I tell him that I came over here and dropped germ bombs on people, destroying and bringing death and destruction? How can I go back and face my family? In a civilized world, how can I tell them these things, that I'm a criminal in the eyes of humanity?
I took part in germ warfare, as far as I know, at the very beginning. At the time I took part in it, germ bombs were referred to as duds.
And then we tried to figure out, how did the communist Chinese get them to make those false confessions? So we're the good guys, and we're only doing that defensively.
Project Bluebird was signed into operation in April 1950 by the director of the CIA, 3 months before the Korean War started. And then it ran for a few years, and then it was rolled over into Artichoke. So Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke are really kind of the same thing. The Artichoke team did interrogations on US soil using the so-called Artichoke technique. And the Artichoke technique involved IV alcohol and drugs, interrogations, safe houses, a variety of different techniques. And the purpose was to try and extract information from a foreign person that was being interrogated. And it also describes erasing memories and implanting false memories that will act as a cover for what really happened. There's a heading in some of the Bluebird documents called The Problem of Disposal of Subjects, what to do with people. And it discusses killing them or the option of using the Artichoke technique to erase their memories. MKUltra was part of a series, so it went from Bluebird in 1950 into Artichoke, into MKUltra in the 50s, which ran into the 60s, and then it was rolled over into MK Search, which ran into the early 70s. So it's kind of a continuous series of programs. And MKUltra itself was divided into 149 sub-projects.
There's actually 4 MKUltra sub-projects on children. This is sub-project 103 in 1959, the Children's International Summer Village. The investigator got money through Human Ecology or one of the other front organizations. I think it was Human Ecology. And apparently legitimately didn't know it was CIA money. All these kids are brought there to be at a summer camp. And the academic was studying how kids communicate when they don't share a common language. That was the project. The purpose of the project is to establish a relationship with young foreign nationals who may be of future interest to the agency.
In 1938, Dr. Albert Hoffman in Switzerland was looking for new drugs in the treatment of migraine headaches. He had been studying substances that came from the molds that grow on rye plants. Now, it turned out that these substances were of no use in the treatment of migraine headaches, but subsequent investigation showed that they are very fascinating indeed in the changes that they produce in our mental state.
LSD was invented kind of by accident in the early 1940s at Sandoz labs in Switzerland. Albert Hoffman was the chemist who kind of stumbled on it and ingested some and went on an LSD trip. The Navy appears to have started LSD experimentation in the late 40s. The CIA got into it starting in 1950. And there was a lot of excitement amongst the contractor doctors for civilian therapy use of LSD. That is actually a therapeutic tool.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
The CIA's interest in LSD was intense. The worry was that the Russians would get hold of it.
Were the Soviets into LSD?
I'm going to have to say I'm sure they were, but if you ask me to prove it, I've never seen any direct proof of it.
But at one point, intelligence information received from Switzerland said that Sandoz Laboratories was about to put 100 million doses of LSD on the open market. And it caused enough concern within the agency that the United States was prepared to buy the entire supply.
The CIA was concerned that the Soviet was going to buy up the entire world's supply of LSD from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, which they wanted for their own mind control experimentation and interrogation. So they contracted with Eli Lilly Company in 1953 and 1954 for $400,000, which is a lot of money back then, to manufacture and supply a secure quantity of LSD to them. So the first manufacturers and distributors of LSD in North America was Eli Lilly Company. LSD works on the serotonin system in the brain. The first selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressant, which works on the serotonin system, was Prozac, manufactured by Eli Lilly Company. So how they developed their expertise in brain serotonin physiology was by being the first manufacturers of LSD.
Lilly has been for a long time really committed to discovering and developing medications to help people with serious mental illnesses, certainly including depression, and of course Prozac, which is arguably the world's most widely recognized antidepressant, has been marketed since 1987 and is the drug which, as several people have noted this morning, is the first and the only antidepressant which actually has a labeled indication for the treatment of children who are depressed.
This is a very small quantity of LSD-25, but all investigators report that it is enough to produce a temporary psychotic dissociation state in any healthy adult. The scene which follows shows what happened to Ronnie after he drank the LSD-25 solution.
I'm going to give you this cup that contains lysergic acid, 100 micrograms.
I have to maintain my attention. It's an effort to talk to you right now, for instance. Reality, believe.
It seems to feel that I'm going to watch it.
You have the feeling that the rock feels that you are watching it. Is that correct?
Well, somehow or other, I think that I'd like to rescue myself from the idea that there's so many different realities here. I'd like to find out what reality I'm in.
Does it seem like you've been here a great long time?
I've lost all time perception. Just trying to keep things or true situations, trying to be aware of it, trying to stay in contact with reality.
Have you felt a waxing and waning of reality?
Well, sometimes I've been confused about which is reality and which isn't, and what little situations I was aware of noises, for instance, that may have been to annoy me and may not have been, and rather than investigate, I just sort of let them go.
This feeling comes over me of almost like the singing, of angels or something. I think it's the soundtrack or the film going through the machine.
Look at the picture.
I'm right here.
Do you feel that you're very close to us in your thinking?
No. No.
Can you tell me anything about your thinking now? Ron?
I seem to wake up to a new world. The same situations, same people and environments, and yet everything, that is my mental state, my life, had been altered. I can't understand.
There's something about this. No more too, man. God, no! No, no, no! Oh, get me out of this terrible place! Get me out of here! Help me! Oh, God, help me!
We are continuing our experimental work with hallucinogenic drugs, such as mescaline, cannabis, adrenochrome, etc.
The CIA and the Army and the other branches of the military all kind of operate as a group with a lot of cross communication. So they developed a series of drugs, one of which is called BZ, which is a kind of super LSD where you go on a trip for about 4 days. In the mid-70s at Senate committee hearings, the General Counsel for the Army released a list of about 125 drugs that the Army had tested for mind control.
The Army Chemical Corps next provided the opportunity for exploration of the nervous system with more powerful substances, both in the laboratories and in the field, and for the realization of a strong desire to reversibly reproduce and control derangements at the highest integrative levels, including the mind. A lot of these LSD and other experiments were funded jointly by the CIA, by the Public Health Service, and by the Masons, basically, through the Scottish Rite Foundation. The cutout organizations, the front organizations are called cutouts. The Human Ecology Foundation, which was one of the front organizations through which the CIA funneled money to other investigators who often legitimately didn't know it was CIA money. Well, they were people at obscure institutions like Cornell, McGill, MIT, Johns Hopkins, Columbia, Princeton, Stanford. So these experiments at top secret clearance level were done at basically all the major teaching institutions in the United States.
Other Army experiments continued on mental patients around the country. Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs, hallucinogenics, and electrodes implanted in the brain. The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the Psychiatry Department at the University of Maryland.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medications, and they should have...
Specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they were going to they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse. They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war, if war is necessary.
Back in the days when I first came here, there was a famous therapy program that operated in Oak Ridge for over a decade. And this program specifically targeted and tried to help serious mentally disordered offenders, people who'd done very serious and terrible crimes. The goal of the program was to try to help these people understand their own behavior, their own motivations, their own background, in an attempt to try to help them avoid that kind of violent behavior in the future. And it was a very radical program in the sense that it used techniques that had not really ever been tried before. The program, for example, used a lot of what we called in those days defense disrupting therapies. This defense disrupting therapy, for example, would have people involved in these very long-term group therapy sessions. They might last, 48 hours, with people not sleeping. The idea, of course, here was that by depriving people of sleep for these kinds of periods of time, their defenses and their masks, if you want, would be lowered, and people would be able to reveal and understand each other's deeper inner selves. They also used some defense-disrupting drugs, most famously LSD, but more commonly they used things like scopolamine or even alcohol to try to get this mask or this outer self peeled away so that the participants in the program would be able to more clearly understand themselves and each other. It was quite fascinating to me and to my colleagues that this program had been going on for such a long time, was so highly regarded, and it was still going on when I first came here in the 70s.
The most chilling experiments we have uncovered took place at this Gothic estate called Raven's Crag, halfway up Mount Royal in Montreal. It houses the Allen Memorial Institute of Psychiatry of McGill University. It was here that the CIA funded a series of experiments, severe experiments. The work was done by the Institute's then director, Dr. Ewen Cameron. It is the closest experimentation to brainwashing yet disclosed. His work, unprecedented in psychiatry, consisted of 3 areas which he called sleep therapy, psychic driving, and the ultimate depatterning.
In his psychic driving, so-called type of therapy, he would give the patient intensive electric treatment in order to make the patient regress deeply, become forgetful, and then he would attempt to implant new ideas in the mind of the patient.
Now, to a layman, it would appear that Dr. Cameron was trying to take the slate and wipe it clean, the slate being the mind. In other words, brainwashing.
Exactly, that's a very good comparison.
Brainwashing.
Yes.
The next step was what he called psychic driving. This involved almost endless tape-recorded messages and more drugs for the patient. Cameron wrote that this was the way to make direct controlled changes in personality. The most severe technique Cameron used was depatterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms. Cameron used this combined sleep electroshock treatment on patients as long as 30 days. One patient he kept asleep for 65 days.
Ewen Cameron at McGill, who was a direct MKUltra contractor, who basically erased people's memories and identities with massive amounts of electric shock, and then played thousands of times over tape loops to try and build up a new personality. And he was successful in the sense that in documented cases where I have the medical records, a person has complete amnesia for age 25 back to birth, and it was all totally wiped out on contract to either the CIA or the Canadian government on purpose at McGill in our lifetimes.
9 people sued the CIA for the experimentation done on them in McGill by Ewen Cameron under funding from the CIA, and the CIA settled out of court. Normally, when you do ECT, you push the button and there's a zzz, electricity goes through your brain, and that's it. That's one dose of ECT. In the Page-Russell technique, the button is pushed 6 times. There's 6 times the energy. So this is the equivalent of over 600 electric shock treatments delivered between May and September. And Ewen Cameron published this in mainstream leading journals, and he called it depatterning. It's totally business as usual, nothing out of the ordinary going on. And it'll say, blood pressure such and such, patient incompetent of stool and feces. Patient disoriented ×3, which means she doesn't know who she is, she doesn't know where she is, and she doesn't know what the year is because she's been depatterned. She literally couldn't control her bowels or bladder, didn't know her own name, didn't recognize her husband or her children, wiped out. Because the idea is you're trying to wipe out that old mental illness, and then after you've done the depatterning, you want to create a new personality. And the way we did that was psychic driving. Psychic driving involved playing two tape loops for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, either in the doctor's voice or the patient's voice, saying, you love your mother, or you're a good citizen, or whatever it might be. And there would be weeks of barbiturate and other medication-induced sleep. And sometimes he would throw in some hallucinogens. This was just a guy trying to learn how to help patients. Except it was funded by the CIA. Why is the CIA interested in depatterning? Well, when you read the Artichoke and Bluebird documents, they discuss this, they discuss that. One of the topics of discussion is the problem of disposal of subjects. And then they discuss in there, what are we going to do with these people? How are we going to get rid of them? And we can't just kill them all. But one thing we can do is wipe out their memories. So this was obviously contracted to figure out how to wipe out people's memories. And why an intelligence agency would be interested in that is extremely obvious. Ewen Cameron was at various times head of the Quebec Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, the World Psychiatric Association, of which he was one of the co-founders, and the Society for Biological Psychiatry. The Society for Biological Psychiatry held numerous meetings and conferences and published the proceedings with and without direct funding by the CIA.
Ewen Cameron, who was a civilian psychiatrist, very politically involved in world psychiatry, became part of the US team that went over to Nuremberg and interrogated the Nazi doctors. While he was over there, he heard about uses of mescaline and hallucinogens in the death camps. Then he came back and did hallucinogen experiments in Montreal. So he literally learned about that from the Nazi doctors. Also, the Nuremberg trials, as we know, gave rise to the Nuremberg Code, which is basically an updating of the Hippocratic Oath, saying that subjects have to give informed consent, they have to be protected, they have to know the nature of the research, it can't be excessively harmful, and so on. But his own experiments violated all of those principles.
And now what we're talking about is not the bad stuff, the mild stuff that they declassified. This is the tip of the iceberg.
The ultimate goal of these projects is just your basic interrogation. We want to extract information from people, and then on top of that, we might want to induce amnesia for the whole interrogation. Or offensively, we want to have people who, if they're captured and they're interrogated, they won't confess because the information is all hidden behind an amnesia barrier.
1932 to 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis study, and the study was basically 400 black, illiterate guys in rural Alabama with syphilis were actively denied treatment for 40 years of follow-up. At the 25-year point of the study, the Surgeon General of the United States signed a certificate. They all got a signed certificate and $25, 1 year for every year of participation in the study. 400 guys for 40 years engaged in how many acts of intercourse and fathered how many children with congenital syphilis, none of which could be identified or treated? I mean, it's literally Nazi death camp level ethical violations.
Pedophiles will commonly tell, if it's the person's daughter, this is our special secret, this is how daddies show love. It's so special we shouldn't talk about it. But actually, of course, they know perfectly well that it's a crime and they don't want to get caught. So it's the same thing with the CIA doctors. They know that it's so outrageous to say, hi, I'm being funded by the CIA. They're trying to figure out how to interrogate people and wipe out memories. Would you mind participating in an experiment where I can help teach the CIA how to do that? It'll never get approved by the ethics committee. No patient will ever consent to it. So they have to consciously, deliberately cover it up.
The effort to cover it up is just kind of saying, oh, it's a funny coincidence, reporting it in the mainstream media, Everybody kind of goes, well, that's good, what's on TV tonight? And it just kind of passes by. And that's kind of the way the cover-up of all this mind control experimentation worked. It's not that it didn't happen, it was published in all these mainstream journals. And at the bottom of the papers, it often says, funded by Department of the Army, funded by U.S. Office of Naval Research, funded by Air Force Office of Scientific Research. It never says funded by the Central Intelligence Agency. But we know that just from reading the journals that it's military funded at a minimum. And I think that the mainstream media is just more and more and more and more of a propaganda arm and less and less independent all the time. 80%, in Gallup surveys, 80% of people in the United States do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. So only 20% of people have bought that story. I mean, we just live in a whole culture of fake stories. A woman comes to the emergency department claiming that her boss at her university made her sit in a room entirely lined with leaves and gave her a bunch of LSD, and she's had a bad trip and now she's in the emergency department. This is the Ames Leaf Room, called the Ames Leaf Room because it was designed by Dr. Ames on contract to the Office of Naval Research. It's basically a box that's got leaves glued to all the walls, and it's open at this end, and you can look into it. The subject is sitting in the Ames Leaf Room, and he's got two knobs that he can move to adjust that white bar that's at the far end of the room. And he's got it adjusted so it appears to be perfectly horizontal to him. While he's in the Ames Leaf Room, he's wearing these goggles that have special lenses called anisoconic lenses that distort all the angles so that nothing seems to meet up properly. It's all out of perspective, doesn't make any sense. And he's high on LSD, funded by the Air Force. So as a result of this experimentation, Dr. Marazzi was able to determine that if you sit in a leaf room wearing lenses and you're high on LSD, you can't see straight. This is incarcerated sex offenders are the experimental subjects here. The psychiatrists involved all were our former military psychiatrists, documented fact, and they're cleared at top secret under the MKUltra contract. And what they do is they give these guys LSD, marijuana, barbiturates, and they interview them, aka interrogate them. And the purpose of the project is to try and get them to confess to sex crimes that they've never been charged with. And the purpose of that is because you want to see if you can give this concoction of different techniques to an enemy agent or some person of interest, will they confess to something that they wouldn't otherwise have confessed to?
Intelligence is nothing really other than information and knowledge. For the days of Socrates, by various methods, and even before that, mankind has been seeking knowledge of everything that influences his own life or the life of the nation to which he belongs. But the idea that it is necessarily nefarious, it's always engaged in overthrowing governments, that's false. At no time has the CIA engaged in any political activity or any intelligence activity. It was not approved at the highest level. The KGB is one of the most sinister organizations that ever was organized.
Do we have an application of morality in our activities they don't?
Oh, far more than they do, yes.
Could you talk on that subject?
Well, only that, as far as I know, we don't engage in assassinations and kidnappings and things of that kind. As far as I know, we never have. As far as we know, they have and done it quite consistently. Given the caliber of the men and women I had working for me, I didn't want to ask them to do a thing that I wouldn't do.
In my position in the CIA, I had a chance to know of and remotely to observe many operations. And I will not deny that there were occasions when the Americans involved in these, as it were, out on the front, had, as people do in wartime, to undertake actions that were contrary to their moral precepts.
You can't take on operations of this, covert operations, or overt for that matter, of this scope, draw narrow boundaries of policy around them, and be absolutely sure that those boundaries will never be overstepped.
I can assure you that the CIA, when I was there as director, and I'm quite sure it's the same with Mr. McCone, has given these committees full information about what it's doing, how it's spending its money, and how it operates.
We've had some statements from those who are supposed to receive this testimony that they really don't know and don't want to know what the CIA is doing.
When I appeared before them again and again, I've been stopped by members of the Congress and said, we don't want to hear about that. We might talk in our sleep. Don't tell us this.
What in the world were they looking for with the magic mushrooms?
I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you... I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
The best-known case is that of this man, Frank Olson, a chemist employed by the Army Chemical Corps, who in 1953 was slipped LSD unknowingly at a meeting with CIA officials. Shortly after that, Olson went into severe depression. He ended his life at this New York hotel by diving through a shaded closed window in his 10th floor room. Frank Olson was the first known fatality in the CIA's LSD program.
Frank Olson was working at Fort Detrick, which is the basically chemical warfare center of the Army, where Amedeo Marazzi worked, who was the Ames Leaf Room guy. And he was directly involved in LSD and other experiments. It looks like he was just about on the edge of becoming a whistleblower. And so he went to a party attended by Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of MKUltra, who ran MKUltra, where he was slipped a dose of LSD and some Cointreau liqueur, went on a bad trip, came home, was all bent out of shape, was taken to see this guy Lashbrook, who's an allergist in Washington, who just happens to be a CIA contractor and LSD expert on the side. And they try and kind of help him out, and then he jumps out the window of the Statler Hotel from the 10th or 12th floor, dies. But actually, it's entirely a cover story. It's almost virtually for certain he was pushed. Frank Olson's family read this, said, wait a minute, that's our dad. We didn't know this is tied into LSD experimentation. They got on the government, and Carter personally met with them and gave them like $750,000 settlement.
Frank Olson's suicide slowed down the CIA's testing of LSD and other drugs, but only momentarily. The CIA was not the only government agency interested in the possibilities LSD and other drugs presented for mind control. The Army Chemical Corps first started working with the CIA and then branched off on its own. It too tested drugs on unwitting victims, and a death would result. The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. Thornwell was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were missing from his unit. Thornwell became a suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep. Despite this severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him.
Tell me about the acid.
I'd rather not. It's a bad trip. It's a bad trip. That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating. Felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins. You know, just everywhere. Oh, it just...
From the Army's point of view, this type of LSD interrogation was a success. Other documents refer to the exploitability of interrogation subjects, cracking them, keeping them off balance mentally, and providing an economical, speedy, and productive aid to interrogation. This bizarre man would be an active participant in that search over the next 2 decades. His name is George White, an OSS captain who had formerly been with the Bureau of Narcotics. He received his early OSS training at the British-run school at Oshawa, Canada, the same school where Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was trained. White referred to the school in his diaries as the Oshawa School of Mayhem and Murder. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation. White set up so-called safe houses for the CIA in New York, here in Greenwich Village, and later in San Francisco, in this hotel, and in an apartment atop Telegraph Hill with a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. While the existence of these safe houses was disclosed last year, details of what took place within them has not been told. A former CIA official who worked in the safe houses reveals that they were used not only for drug testing, but to study sexual behavior and how it could be used to manipulate people.
George White hired prostitutes to go to bars and pick guys up, bring them back to the safe house, have sex with them and slip them LSD without their knowing it, and the CIA guys would make scientific observations of this through the one-way mirror. And it says in the documents, the purpose of this is to study the effects of an unwitting dose of LSD under conditions that mimic a field interrogation. Just down at the bottom it says, it's a lot more difficult than you would think to create these Jekyll-Hyde personalities. So Jekyll-Hyde personalities equals multiple personality equals the Manchurian Candidate. So why is there a comment about the difficulty of creating Jekyll-Hyde personalities when there's only one contact with each of the Johns? He has sex and he gives LSD. You can't possibly be creating a new identity in that guy. So the only possible person you could be creating a new identity in is the prostitute. These are Manchurian Candidate prostitutes who were being run through simulations to see whether they could turn a trick and attempt to extract information from the guy, and maybe LSD would help with that. These are unwitting civilians, haven't given informed consent, don't know they're getting LSD, and there's no follow-up. How did they go off the rails? Did they have fun? Did they go home? What happened? No idea whatsoever. Absolute and total violation of medical ethics. And there's doctors under MKUltra and MKSearch directly involved in this experimentation.
In terms of the Manchurian Candidate, the idea is to use hypnosis, drugs, fear, terror to split off part of the mind. And then you can get control of that part of the mind separately, and that part of the mind can carry out missions. You could use sexual torture, you could use witnessing torture of others, you could use physical torture, mental torture. There's really no limit to it.
Louis Jolyon West is known as Jolly West because he's a very jolly guy, I assume. Top secret cleared MKUltra contractor. One of his greatest accomplishments was killing an elephant at Oklahoma City Zoo with a dose of LSD. Louis Jolyon West, Martin Orne, Margaret Singer, and Robert Lifton were expert witnesses at the Patty Hearst trial. She's in her apartment with her boyfriend Stephen Weed when the Symbionese Liberation Army storms in, guns literally blazing, there's gunfire. Her boyfriend Stephen Weed's knocked out with a rifle butt. She's put in the trunk of the car, taken away to the Symbionese Liberation Army safe house, where she's kept in a closet for 45 days. There's mock FBI raids during which she thinks she'll be killed at any time. She's raped in the closet, extreme sensory deprivation, sensory isolation. She then subsequently participates in a bank robbery under the name of Tanya and is photographed during the bank robbery. There was a murderer in Dallas, so they called him in to examine the murderer, whose name was Jack Ruby. Now flash forward to the 1995s, Timothy McVeigh's arrested for the Oklahoma City bombing, taken to Tinker Air Force Base, where he alleges that a computer chip was removed from his buttocks, and a psychiatrist has brought in Louis Jolyon West. He was involved in the UCLA Violence Project, which was actually approved by Ronald Reagan when he was the governor of California, but shut down by public protest before it actually became operational. And they were going to take sex offenders, put electrodes in their brain, and there would be both a tracking electrode and an immobilization electrode, basically. So they would track these guys when they were released from prison. If they went outside a restricted area, a signal would be sent to their brain, immobilizing them, and the police would come pick them up.
Going back to the 50s, in the CIA military documents, and also in the general psychiatric and medical literature, there's very clear descriptions of putting electrodes in people's brains and then stimulating those electrodes with radio waves from a remote transmitter box and controlling the person's behavior, dramatic changes in behavior and mental state.
Now we're at brain electrode experiments at Tulane. Robert Heath, what he did is he put electrodes in this gay guy's brain, who was 19 years old, and he studied his brain electrical activity, and then he hooked him up to a little belt. So I've got a little belt here. On his belt, he had a button in a box, and he could push the button because the wire went from the box to the electrode into his brain, and bring himself to kind of a pre-orgasmic state. So they had to take the box away from him because he pushed the button 1,500 times in 3 hours. They had him watch heterosexual pornography over and over and over and over while in a pre-orgasmic state to try and condition him to become straight. Jose Delgado, you can actually find him on YouTube. You can see the video where he's in the bull ring with the bull that comes charging at him. The bull's got electrodes in his brain. He pushes the box and the bull just goes over there.
Neurophysicist Dr. Jose Delgado was financed by the Office of Naval Research. In this experiment, the bull is sedated. Electrodes are implanted in its brain. Delgado transmits an electronic impulse to the center of the bull's brain. Delgado has remote control of the animal. Recently released CIA documents refer to the feasibility of remote control of animals, and that special investigations will be conducted toward the application of selected elements of these techniques to man.
This is his book, Physical Control of the Mind. We need a program of psychosurgery and political control of our society. The purpose is physical control of the mind. Everyone who deviates from the given norm can be surgically mutilated. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electrically control the brain. Someday, armies and generals will be controlled by electrical stimulation of the brain. This is a Yale professor of neurosurgery. He literally wanted electrodes in every brain in the population. The controlling elite would be so small, even the generals would have electrodes in their brains.
No doubt, like everything else, it's become more miniaturized, more computer sophisticated, and probably can be controlled from satellites now, I would assume. There's documents going again back into the 50s under MKUltra showing using either sound waves or electromagnetic waves that you can knock monkeys out, knock human beings out, make them disoriented.
Unwitting civilians have been exposed to hypnosis, LSD, chemical, biological, and radiological weapons. We know that these non-lethal weapons exist, that they can affect your mental state, your behavior, they can cause pain, they can cause confusion, they can knock you out. What are the odds that those weapons have never been tested on unwitting civilians? I say 0.
On the one hand, it's sort of, you can't do anything is the problem, because if somebody's beaming, this electromagnetic weapons at you from a satellite or from an aircraft, how are you going to know it's happening? How are you going to prove it's happening? And how are you ever going to get them to stop? It's impossible. On the other hand, I think that by far the best way to protect freedom and democracy is think critically, don't buy everything, research it, and be aware that you're subject to an awful lot of propaganda.
We lack the trained men who would be able to plan and implement operations in an area we think is vitally important. Because of this, we are also requesting that your team of advisors include a senior officer who is thoroughly experienced in psychological operations.
The PSYOP tools are radio, television, leaflets, newspapers, loudspeakers, and face-to-face communication. PSYOP is now a major weapon in 20th century warfare.
I say that mind control is kind of at 2 levels. There's general mind control, which would include propaganda, disinformation, spinning things in the media and so on. The level of mind control I'm interested in I call psychiatric mind control, where there's an actual doctor in a one-to-one relationship with the person. And I'm interested in that because it's a gigantic violation of professional ethics. So at Abu Ghraib and at Guantanamo Bay, we've got psychiatric level mind control going on.
We see it very clearly in the light of day in both Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, where all the components of Bluebird, Artichoke, MKUltra are still in operation currently. Sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, hooding, doing frightening mock killings, good cop, bad cop interrogations, waterboarding, sexual humiliation, cultural humiliation, electric shocks. All these things are being used for a fact currently. Trauma-based mind control is, the basic idea is, part of the interrogation technique is you frighten the person tremendously. And this happens and is reported by people who are captured in the Middle East and held. It also goes on at Guantanamo Bay, where you threaten them with death, you're going to execute them now, you take them out to be shot, but the guns never go off.
There's behavioral science consultation teams at Guantanamo Bay that are psychologists who go in there and run the interrogation programs, run the psychological part of it. And there's physicians consulting to this because you don't want to push the guy, unless you do want him to die, you don't want to push him too far because he might die. And the techniques that we know are used are hooding, sitting in very stressful positions like crouched down against the wall for prolonged periods, sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, some degree of beatings, waterboarding. We know that there's sexual humiliation, there's humiliating their culture, the Quran and their religious beliefs. There's forcing them to do sexual acts with each other. Female military officers come in and come on to them sexually, aggravate them sexually. These are the techniques of mind control. There's not just one thing that you do. I've heard many people say they were in Monarch, and I filed Freedom of Information Act requests with all the branches of the military, Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, and all of them said they had nothing on Project Monarch.
I've met both Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien, and they're both extremely pleasant people. They seem very genuine. I don't think they're making things up. It's not some kind of a publicity scam at all. Whether every single detail of her story is actually historically accurate, I'd say somewhat doubtful.